Hello, cats and kittens, and welcome to another edition of the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. I'm your host, Peter. Tonight, I bring to you Nick Kizirnis. You may know him from the obvious, the Mulchmen. You may know him from Cage. What I'd like you to know him for now is the new single, Way to Me, featuring Kate Wakefield of Long on vocals. Peppered throughout this single, we have Mark Patterson from Sunvolt, some great production work, a great quote-unquote Indy Noir feel, and a very mournful tone that I can't help but feel is apropos for the coming season. So like I said, this is part one of a two-parter. Part two will be coming up in the coming days. For right now, this is the first hour and a half of our discussion, just in time for his show tomorrow at the Yellow Cab Tavern in good old Ohio. Without further ado, folks, I give to you Nick Kizirnis, part one on the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Hello.
Hello. Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing fine. You can hear me okay?
Absolutely. Everything looks and sounds great.
Cool.
For the sake of legality, could you state your name and give me permission to record your voice and likeness?
No. Hey, I'm Nick Kizirnis, and I'm happy to have you record my voice and likeness. And I see the Rocket from the Crypt album back there.
Scream, Dracula Scream. Yeah.
Yeah. We played with his surf band a few years ago.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Swami John Reese. And
yeah. Well, then I saw them play a few years back on that tour, actually, and a little club in Cincinnati, and they were amazing. And then later we played in another small club with Swami John Reese, and that record was amazing, and they were incredible. That was great. Super nice guy. Great people.
John's wonderful. And, you know, like between you take Rocket from the Crypt and, you know, everything he'd done with Drive Like Jehu.
Yeah.
Such an inventive and imaginative guitar player for what could be considered a very small subsect of the underground.
Yeah.
And that album specifically was their only foray into what one would consider the mainstream, because they were on Interscope Records for that and RFTC, and that was kind of it.
Yeah. But I mean, for bands,
good.
If you remember that time period, I mean, we had a couple clubs in Cincinnati that used to get, I mean, they would get everybody, right? So like you'd see, Manor Astro Man there, then you'd see Rocket from the Crypt, then you'd see Unrest, and then you'd see Girls versus Boys. I mean, it was a parade. But I mean, I remember when it's like, of course, I worked at record stores at the time, of course, so it's like, it was them making a big album. But it's like all the gang vocals and the horns and the stuff. It's like I just thought it was fantastic, and I checked, by the way. It still sounds good today.
No, it absolutely does. Yeah.
I love stuff like that. You know, like going back and listening to some of that stuff that we used to. I mean, I'm in Dayton, Ohio, right? So I worked in record stores when, Guided by Voices had thrown in the towel, and then someone put out Shocker in Gloomtown, and everything went exploded. And so that was the time period I was working, right? So and there was just so much amazing music that was happening at that point, while all the music we were listening to, I think, I'm not sure, but I think maybe was becoming sort of this like thing unto itself. And then impossible things were happening at that point. Like Sonic Youth being one,
oh my God,
band had looked to for years, and then they became so big that they were
the year that punk broke. I mean, I was in high school in 1991,
Okay.
I'll be 46.
Okay.
That's my era. That's when, the zeitgeist was really catching my ears. Although precursor to that, I was into The Cure. My first concert was The Clash opening up for The Who. My dad had taken me. So there was that.
That's awesome.
That whole thing going on. But there's something very intrinsic to your sound that, it reminds me of our Rocket from the Crypts and our Drive Like Jehu's and
good reason, actually. I mean, it's because I'm just a few years older, right? So I graduated college in '92, went straight into record stores. But so like in the late '80s, it was like Replacements, Husker Du. I mean, of course, all the punk.
Paul Westerberg's my absolute hero. So yeah, I get it.
So it's like it was all those guys, and at the tail end of that, then you had bands like Sonic Youth starting to come up, right? And then it just took off, right? So that was like through the end of my college years, right after that. So that whole wave of music was like, I always think of, my friends and I always talk about like the Replacements and of course all the like we won't even, like the Clash, the Pistols, the Ramones, all that stuff was like a blueprint. But really bands like Husker Du, especially the Replacements, and a lot of X was a huge one. Just saw them a few weeks ago. And bands like that. The Psychedelic Furs, yes. The Cure, not as much. And then going from that to Sonic Youth and the Pixies.
Yeah.
And that sort of represented that next shift that ended up playing out with all of that, the rise of Guided by Voices, Sonic Youth, Pavement, John Spencer Blues Explosion, all the bands that we could go on and on from there. That just was like your early mid '90s, right? So, I mean, when you said that, it's like I think that music's probably pretty indelible in the stuff I do, no matter what style I play. It's just kind of funny how you can hear, like, people will say that to me. They'll hear things like that and go, "Oh yeah," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that in 20 years."
But when I listen to your music, Badalamenti also comes in.
Oh, okay.
Play in a very big way, because you're creating these like, as it was put on your website, Indy Noir. there is that sort of Twin Peaks, David Lynchian, Angelo Badalamenti-esque lilt of a slight darkness bubbling under the surface of what is a very mellifluous and almost surf rock oriented overtone.
Why, thank you, Peter. I appreciate that very much, and that is that's a pretty good description of however much I think of it consciously, is very much in what I go for in terms of sound. I actually have a surf instrumental group I've been playing with for years and years and years, and that was a big sort of blueprint for the way I approached guitar, right? So like no matter what I play, and so it's worked its way into those recordings, even though I write maybe things that are more traditional based. It finds its way in there. I mean, no matter
East
what
Bay Ray finds his way in there too.
Yeah. I was gonna say, and he was an early guitar player, like once I was in, when we would listen to punk and then hear bands like the Dead Kennedys, JFA, Agent Orange, and all of those groups that love to kind of co-opt some of the surf music. That, for me, as a kid growing up hearing Dwayne Eddy, Johnny Cash, so being into all of those guitar players back then, and then hearing those guys do it when I was a teenager, then really that was an indelible imprint for sure. But it's just funny. I don't think about, like, a lot of times I won't think about East Bay Ray, but it's exactly right. I mean, there's no, absolutely. So I'm glad you mentioned that. So
it's interesting that these are hallmarks, because there's a very rich tradition of surf in the confines of punk and indie rock, that it never goes away. It never goes out of style. There's always a Dick Dale devotee somewhere in the mix, be it your East Bay Ray or whomever, Swami John.
or even bands like Low Straitjackets and then Manor Astroman and and a lot of those groups that we used to play with some of those bands back in years ago. And it's just interesting that tradition is like alive and it's in the retro space, but then also finds its way into indie and alternative. And honestly, like if we're going to talk about East Bay Ray, right, like we could draw a line actually probably from Dwayne Eddy and there's a few people in there, and we'll end up at East Bay Ray, and then we'll go to Joey Santiago, who is absolutely
of the Pixies, like
made a massive impression on me at age 18. Actually, we played with them in New York City, and in my punk band, at CBGB's, we played with them, and I had no idea. I didn't really know them when we played with them. Well, they were just about to become massive, and it was just so unbelievable. Also, nicest people, like ever, and that his guitar playing was like, and I know it was both of them that were creating that, but his sound and the way he approached things from then on, everything he's ever done, right? So that was a huge thing for me. And then I think when I started hearing other guitar players in that sort of era we were talking about, whether they were more experimental like a Thurston Moore or more straightforward, like, well, not exactly straightforward like what Pavement would do, or even what John Spencer would do, like those guys. There's that thread is I mean, we all must have been hearing that stuff in one way or the other in some form. So, but I'm glad you mentioned it from that perspective, because I think sometimes I don't give that enough consideration. I tend to think of go back to the original people, and I sometimes forget how much they influenced me, got me to actually get the guitar and go,
because people will sometimes like overlook Sonny Vincent and go back to Carl Perkins, but there's so many steps in between that are very, very palpable and very important to the lineage of that style of music. And I don't know if people are as geeky as I am in regards to being historians and appreciators.
I can get pretty geeky about it, but it's like, the other like sort of aspect of that too, because like my dad was a big Elvis fan, big Johnny Cash fan, big Dwayne Eddy fan. He had all the singles, and so when I started getting into punk, and you got introduced to X, and then there's Billy Zoom playing all this revved up rockabilly stuff like a punk. And we just saw him a few weeks ago. It was the first time I ever saw them with Billy Zoom, and he was just amazing, right? It was just, you could tell how happy he was to be playing, And but that is like my friends and I are still like, he still makes our heads spin, because there's also like there's such joy in his playing too, So kind of going back to the like guys like Link Ray, all these people, right? It's just like people who like, I don't know what,
no Man or Astro Man without Link Ray, period.
Right.
End of story.
Yeah. I mean, and that stuff like is to me that approach to guitar playing and just that spirit and all that stuff, whether it was super raw like Link Ray or some of the other rockabilly guys like a Charlie Feathers, or stuff that was more like really like kind of on the hillbilly side, or whether you get these more like guys who had more like like a Cliff Gallup, or early rockabilly guys that had more of a jazz background or things like that. I just love that whole blend of it, and I love how it's made its way, and we keep hearing it in different music now. So even when you get people like that kind of, and so now I'm going to pull off from a side, you get people like Chris Isaak, right, who kind of like would sort of dip into that sort of laid back, like, sort of the softer side of Gene Vincent, but that guitar that he had, and all that stuff. It's like, I find that stuff to also be all in the mix too, right? So like,
of course,
I hear that, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, do you listen to that?" I'm like, well, actually, I think we're all listening to the same stuff from before, and some of it really rocks hard, and some of it's really quiet, and some of it's really weird, But that mix to me is really exciting. So so I'm glad, like the way you described that was really cool. I appreciate that, because that I didn't coin indie noir, but we came across it somewhere, and it was like, well, that's sort of a fit, and so we kind of played with it, because it was just kind of, it was just like, well, okay, there's that Americana, but it's like more reverbed out like my other music, it's a little grittier and darker, and so we use that, and I think it kind of fits. It's turning out to fit.
Well, especially when you consider, like, I Put a Spell on You, okay? Take it way, way back to the beginnings of that sonic stew and that drunken howl.
Yeah.
That came from this particular gentleman. And you, like, take that blueprint, you wouldn't have Rocket from the Crypt, Scream Dracula Scream. It would not have occurred.
Right.
So
John Spencer, Blues Explosion again, a lot, groups like that, where or they, I mean, and that is to me like, like I guess the Zeppelin thing is a whole different story, right?
Yeah.
But like I think those guys were definitely like paying tribute to the to that music, because they were wearing it on their sleeve. Like John Spencer and John Nyes and those guys, it's like to go back to the Screamin' Jay Hawkins, that stuff, and even Screamin' Jay Hawkins, Bo Diddley, a lot of those people who had a really raw aspect of it.
Little Richard,
and then you hear that stuff come through in like a PJ Harvey, even like those first couple PJ Harvey records that we just happened to have on the other day, where you're just like, oh my god,
it's so unhinged,
really amazing. And I think whether music is hard hitting, just like brutal, we're referring to some pretty brutal, like hard hitting stuff, or it's on the softer side, it's like it still has some of that same thing. Because sometimes, like, I play with guys now who play harder music, and I make them play these like softer, more somber songs. But it's like, to me, all that energy is still the same. It's still there. It's just coming out in different ways.
It's no different.
Yeah. And you don't know until, like, I wasn't sure until we actually would play it, and then it comes across, and people resonate with it, and it's like, oh cool, okay, great, and then you can play with it a little bit. Maybe it's a little loud, like I for a little while the shows, they'd be a little harder. Some of the shows they've been a little softer, a little spacier, a little more reverbed, and it's like you just kind of play with it and see where it is. But yeah, it's just funny because you're mentioning this stuff, and it's like sometimes I'll get a little too in my Nico Case world, and I'll forget all about East Bay Ray, right? And it's like all legitimate. I need to think about that a little bit more, because like, like I just, when we talk about that, I remember how much enjoyment I got from those records, like a shocking level of enjoyment. I remember hearing like this first stuff would come out, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, sorry, I apologize. The thing is on. It's like, you can't even believe it's happening. That kind of thing, right? Like Clash level event.
Because when you first get that taste, because there is something very familiar about it all, because it is kind of what we'd grown up on. Our parents were born in the 40s, so like they'd seen the birth of rock and roll, so that kind of got put in our faces. And when you translate that to something that is in the 80s a modernist take, which is what punk was, a very modernist take on original rockabilly and rock and roll, it never loses its power. It's a different era with the same rallying cry and the same four chords and the truth that we were looking for all along. That's what got us out of the big band era.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because I think when we can say that like 80s, and we can say that 90s, and then if we start thinking, okay, 2000s, I think as you get closer, if you're not completely in it, which I'm just going to say, okay, like I don't feel completely in it. I'm in certain aspects of it, but sometimes it gets a little harder. It takes a little while to notice and appreciate stuff. There's tons of stuff in the past 10 years or so and maybe that has to do with raising kids too, but it's like you just start to miss for a minute, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, how did I did not know about this, right? Because you're not getting the mixtapes or whatever, so but I don't know, like I still find, like, I'm going to struggle right now if I were to say who is really, like doing that now. But then it is. Sure it is, because you'll turn around and be like, oh yeah, oh my gosh, I can't believe this, or you throw something out, or, like, even bands like I was just thinking about the National, somber and low key band. And yet we've seen them 3 times. And it's like, those shows are amazing, and the energy level is amazing, and things like that, where, it's like sometimes it comes in forms that you don't always expect it to be too.
And someone like the National, who are taking a form that never really resonated with me. And I've seen the Dead with Jerry Garcia, because I'm a child of hippies. You know what I mean? So I've seen this stuff. Like I saw Jerry Garcia a few times before he died. It never made sense to me until the National happened. And I was an adult and well into my adulthood and well into being a father, when I hear what they had done with that original form, and I began to appreciate it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to guys, okay, now these guys they're like really good, but they're also minimalists, right? So
Yeah.
like they're into creating a drone that is like very different than what the Dead were doing. The Dead they were also creating a sort of a drone, repetition too, but it's like, yeah, it's really it's interesting, but it also makes me feel like that there's always going to be more that's
Mhm.
going to come. People are going to keep doing it, and it may take a minute to recognize it in some ways because you've seen it all, you heard it all at this point in 2023, or in
Yeah.
2023 there'll be no more music, so but it's like but it will be, there'll be all of this stuff, and I see that in our music community here, and I see it, when I go places, and then it's nice to still be surprised by stuff,
Yeah.
because sometimes, and I do think, I'm sorry, Joey, but like sometimes parenthood can do that. You can start to
Yes.
become, you're limited in your ability to look at stuff, but it's really nice then when you get the chance. My kids are, so like, and this is how this goes, is that my daughter just saw, she's 20, she's in Chicago. She's a tattoo artist.
Mhm.
She is just saw Julian Baker, Angel Olsen, and Sharon Van Etten, right?
Oh,
And
wow.
so with her, I wouldn't have gotten, well, I did actually turn her on to Boy Genius, but
Yeah.
the others I wouldn't have known as much about if she weren't pointing me to like Girl in Red, and Men I Trust and stuff, so it's like, it's kind of cool that she's feeding back some of that stuff too, so, and
It's nice to see that come full circle too, because in the late 80s, early 90s, my father and I had the same sort of interplay
mm,
where like I was a massive Chili Peppers fan in the 80s.
mhm.
Massive, like Uplift Mofo Party Plan turned my world on its ear, because it did have that Sly Stone and Parliament, as
Yeah,
well as Fear, and like
yeah.
that, like it was all in the mix. And I remember presenting it to my father, the jazz musician who loves funk.
Mhm.
Hey, Dad, check this out. And he's like, I smell the Sly Stone on this.
Yeah, yeah.
I smell the Parliament on this. Yeah, yeah, this is great.
That's
This is
cool.
great. And from there on, like, of course, he didn't love too much of the hardcore aspect when it came down to Black Flag, into Sick of It All, and
Mhm.
Gorilla Biscuits and stuff. He understood the idea of the rebellion behind it, but didn't dig the music. But when it came to the Chili Peppers and Sonic Youth and Fear, he really liked Fear, and X, because his favorite all-time band were the Doors. And I said,
Yeah,
hey, Dad,
yeah.
Ray Manzarek managed this band.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now
Yeah,
you all of a sudden have the doors open. Yeah.
that
Well, it's
that through line came into
yeah,
play.
yeah. That's funny because like I said, my dad listened to Elvis. He had all the like the Dion and the pop stuff too, but he was a huge Elvis fan in the 50s when he was a kid.
Mhm.
And then he loved Dwayne Eddy. How do you get Dwayne Eddy? I have no idea, but that one left it in, that was indelible.
Yeah,
And then he later was introducing me to, that was the borderline between your like Bakersfield, Buck Owens stuff,
yeah,
Merle Haggard, and now we're going over to Waylon and Willie, which he was also into that stuff too, but I wasn't really into that stuff. But he would play that for me all the time. And then years later, I ended up playing in a rockabilly band that was also playing honky tonk, like Western swing stuff and all of this. And then I have friends who play and that do that sort of stuff. But it was like, and then I was in playing surf music for years too. But it was like all of that came from. I mean, I had to go through all my punk and alternative and all that stuff to get there, but eventually I did. Oddly
yeah.
enough, it was Link Ray that was the gateway drug for that, because I didn't
Link
discover him until later.
Link
He
Ray
was
is a
like
gateway drug for everybody.
it was shot. It was like, that was a big one where I was like, wait a minute, what is this? How did I never know about this? But it's like at that point, stuff was so regional that like my dad, he was in
Yeah,
Wisconsin. He wouldn't have known necessarily about Link Ray. It was mainly East Coast, I guess. But
yeah,
and a lot of these guys like Hazel Adkins, Charlie Feathers, I mean, they weren't necessarily everything was regional, right? Elvis was an anomaly in that way, and then the
yeah.
people followed him too. But anyway, it's just really interesting how that stuff all goes and evolves and how we make those connections. And I'm happy that, you know, with my daughter, she grabbed all my records that we've been talking about and went through them all, and then she kind of moved on and made her own decision. And she's a big pop fan and Taylor Swift fan, and she just got tickets for Demi Lovato because she's a pop girl, is what she says. But she's, you know, big into the Boy Genius, and, you know, she was big into the 21 Pilots, so they did 5 nights in Columbus, like as a giving back to their fans, and we basically camped out in Columbus so she could go to like the tiny club that they first played in, and then the big arena and stuff. So she's a big music fan. It's cool that, and my wife's also a huge music fan. So she has poured, like what you were saying, you were into the Cure. Well, she was into the Cure and the Smiths and all that stuff. And of course, we all met at Bowie, right?
We did all meet at Bowie.
Bowie.
Yes.
But in high school, I didn't listen to a whole lot of that side because I was like, well, if it's not the Ramones, it's crap or whatever, you know. And but then she's influenced a lot. Like she's a big Father John Misty fan, big National fan, big Rufus fan, and she's introduced me to tons and tons of Destroyer and, you know, like all of these groups. So that's made a much more. That's actually had an influence on how I've thought about songwriting too, because my songwriting tends to be a little more traditional based because I just like it for some reason. But like all of those groups I mentioned are all had their roots in tradition, but they kind of bucked that as well, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, where Rufus is very over the top and jazzy and
orchestral almost. And Rufus orchestral. Wainwright, yeah.
And you know, and so those guys have been hearing that has been. I just love hearing different things like that and different takes on it, right?
Yeah.
It's sometimes it can be too easy to stay in your lane, and that's been a big thing for me. Is like, how do I know my lane but get out of it is at the same time? What do I need to do to make that happen?
The thing is, people in our age group, musicians like us in our age group, our lane is very, very wide.
Well, it is
because we have T-Rex to pull from. T-Rex were my first love. Mark Bolan was my first musical love, and then I moved into the Stones and Sabbath.
Okay.
But T-Rex seemed to be like me Mach 1. That was the measuring stick by which I based all other greatness thereafter. And I think that's a phenomenal through line because he had taken so much from Link Ray to, you know, early Pink Floyd and made it stompy.
Yeah.
So if you want to know where kind of like the part and parcel like impetus of punk came from, you got to take Detroit and you got to take England and you got to take the Stooges and T-Rex and smash them together. And there's the blueprint for all of it, with the little Doors. With Jim Morrison,
a surprising, a little bit of Doors, but a surprising amount of Doors, and then there's Jonathan Richman just kind of wandering around in the middle of it.
I mean, lost in the in between with the glitter.
Yeah, that's just a one. Like I don't know, that's a amazing. Like I love that though because it's like a lot of people. You know, you can go to like London, but of course the Ramones came over and influenced them, and that. You know, all that stuff. And then the stuff that actually birthed the Ramones was all like David Byrne. And I mean, all that whole scene, you know, but then you go back, the backstory is like Detroit, right?
Detroit
like,
is,
I mean, and all that stuff.
The White Panthers movement, like, there were Black Panthers boosters, the MC5,
right?
And you know, you do have Death, which Death is almost a divisive band for people because you bring them up and they're like, nah, nobody cared about them, but they fucking did,
right?
Because Death had a very big impact on the Stooges, the MC5, and that whole Detroit vibe, even the Amboy Dukes, which let's face facts, I hate Ted Nugent for who he is, but I love a lot of his early music, especially the Amboy Dukes.
Yeah,
and
I mean, they did some cool pioneering stuff. You got it
very much true. So.
Yeah, that gets tough when you have artists who are also like Ted Nugent, who I was never a fan of Ted Nugent because as a kid, you know, like, I mean, you had horrible stuff on the radio, but then every once in a while a Queen song would punch through.
Yeah.
And then, you know, then suddenly a Ted Nugent song would punch through. But that was kind of, you know, so like I remember early on hearing Cat Scratch Fever. And even then I was like, I know it's not Amboy. I mean, obviously, then that led me to go back and hear the Amboy Dukes. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. But by that point, Ted Nugent was ruined for me, which is fine because you know then I'd go to the Kmart or whatever and see the albums, and I was like, ugh. And you know, like, and I have to admit, the whole time I was never into Kiss. I missed it. I just missed it. My friends were all into Kiss.
That was kind of my shit too. I was a Kiss kid for sure.
Later, like once they were starting, they still had the makeup on, but they had already done their best stuff, right? Yeah. Then they probably, I'm just gonna admit, like I kind of like ignored them. I had friends who were into them, but then MTV started and they made a couple of videos when they were still in makeup, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. This is pretty fun. But then I went back and listened to it. I'm like, we went and saw them on one of the shows, you know, but like it was really fun. I totally appreciate, you know, when they were on it, they were on it. But you know, I don't know. It's just kind of depends on where you come in, because like
they were New York Dolls, Pat Cabaret. That's what they were.
Yeah. And I like the New York Dolls, you know, but
way more.
Yeah. A little more going on there. So. Wow, we made it all the way to the New York Dolls.
Well, I mean, like a motherfucker's right here. Yeah, I mean, you want to know about
the Heartbreakers, like,
beautiful rock and roll. I mean,
what do you got going on there? So is this like just highlights of the collection? Because
I own over 5,000 LPs, and this is just like stuff I've been listening to in the past 3 weeks. That's
awesome. I love it. That gives me my record store vibes right there. You know,
I worked in one for over a decade. I managed one for over a decade.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we just bought a few 12x12 frames. Actually, I've got my Guided by Voices Propeller album and Lost Splash and Brainiac's first album and Love.
I have every Brainiac. First pressing. Every one.
Cool.
From 7-ish to 12. I was a massive Brainiac fan. Still am. I mean,
still sounds incredible.
They're Ohio. They are Ohio.
They are actually. Yeah. They drank a lot of the water.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's like it was really neat. They put out the those Touch and Go put out those demos and the live recordings and things like that, and I think stuff that people were kind of waiting to hear for a while, you know, like the odds and ends and the stuff that was a real pain in the butt to get, you know, because I remember when they did the split singles and, you know, and stuff like that. So that was really nice. They put that stuff out. So
it deserved to be repressed in perpetuity. They need to be available for the next scene that comes up, because they are ubiquitous. They will always be important. Once they had made that mark, just like Fugazi made their mark, just like Sonic Youth, whomever, even Nirvana, who were not they were not a big thing for me because I was already a hardcore kid at that point. I loved FSD already. So
yeah.
You know, was Kurt Cobain brilliant? Yes, of course. Was it my number one pick? No, because I had already been there. They were a great gateway drug. But I was already in a hardcore band for 4 years by the time Smells Like Teen Spirit came out.
Okay.
So, you know, like...
Yeah, that's interesting. For me, it's funny because just a few years difference. For me, I was spending a lot of time listening to, I was probably like in a big Devo, Hitchcock, a lot of stuff, and I was kind of away from the straight hitting guitar stuff.
Yeah.
And I wasn't finding anything at the time that was getting me excited. And my friend was like, you need to hear Nirvana, you need to hear Soundgarden, you need to hear Pearl Jam. And Soundgarden fine, Pearl Jam fine, whatever. Like all that stuff was fine. But when he played, it wasn't Bleach, it was Nevermind. I was like, oh wow. And of course I recognize the production for being what it is, but I was also like, you could instantly hear under the production what was going on. And then he played Bleach and I was like, okay, got it. Yeah, I totally got it. Got the whole thing. Like, and it was nice because at the same time, why did they get that contract? Was because of Sonic Youth. And I'm like, oh, I haven't really been listening to Sonic Youth, and they were roaring up, you know, because they were through record labels left and right. And so for me, they were actually kind of a refresher. They were like, oh yes. And I felt, and there was so much coming out at that point that I thought, oh, maybe I'm not really paying attention for whatever reason. Like I took my eye off the ball. So for you were already like, I mean, you just mentioned like Fugazi and a lot of that stuff that was happening too. And that stuff, of course, we spent a lot more time listening into that. It was more inspiring, but you couldn't, I mean, like what Nirvana had, like the support they got, right? I mean, they were doing it all themselves, but then obviously Sonic Youth helped. And then they turned right around and did it because a friend of mine toured with them at the time. It was like they turned around and helped all of those bands at the
And
same time.
they helped the Melvins, who half
And
of Nirvana was the Melvins,
yeah,
and the other half was the Pixies.
yeah,
You take the Pixies and the Melvins and smash them together, and you get Nirvana.
Right. And that was the thing, because it's like, as much as I love the Pixies, it was cool to hear another band that was being influenced by that. And then, of course, every band we could ever mention that happened around that time that we were at the record store. Right. So it's like, like things like that to me are just, they're really exciting when those things happen. Now, do I listen to that a whole lot now? No, I don't, but I totally appreciate it. And if we put it on right now, we'd be like, yeah.
We'd both love it, because in all honesty, In Utero of the entire clutch of Nirvana albums is the fucking Nirvana album, in my opinion.
Yeah. Because me too. That's what I think too. Yeah.
They dig so deep. Like, number one, they go to Steve Albini, who, like, Neurosis, like, like they record with Albini. Neurosis is my be all end all band. Which is probably, in the context of our conversation, sounds weird, but
no, it's all in there. Everything's in there tonight.
yeah. We're crazy humans, apparently, but like, that is the album that it takes it to that other level. It gets that dark. It gets that heavy. It also gets that McCartney.
Yeah.
In a really real and beautiful way, because as much as I love the heavy and the crazy, I'm a Beatles guy.
Yeah, I'm a Beatles guy as well. So it's I teach Beatles songs to all my students. I have young guitar students, and Beatles is the stuff we work with, and we can apply it. I mean, and they're into White Stripes and stuff like that, but it's but they can get that. I mean, there's so much to work with in those songs, and it's still like, we just watched that McCartney thing with Rick Rubin, and the whole time Rick Rubin's just like, can you believe this? Can you believe that? And it's really great just to, like, I mean, and not to get like academic about it, but it's like, you can listen to them in a completely passive way and let that wash over you, or you can get academic about it, and you can
same with the Beach Boys.
Same with the Beach Boys. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Groups like that, the guys were just so, it just wasn't that they were so good, so capable, but they had somehow tuned in to whatever it was that needed to happen and figured out how to put it together. And I find that to be like, we just saw Brian Wilson a couple of years ago too. He's touring with that current group, and that was a refresher in appreciating how just incredible that is, the stuff they're doing. And that McCartney series is the same way. And I'm really glad he did that. I'm glad he's kind of, maybe he's acknowledging his own age, and I mean, I knew some people just saw him that just said it was fantastic, but he's also like sharing a lot about that, because it's everyone's so interested in it. It just changed everything. Right. So it's really great to hear him kind of reflecting on that stuff more and kind of opening up. And when he and Rick Rubin were playing with the Faders on Live and Let Die and showing the symbol in Penny Lane that I never heard, and stuff like that. It's like, I'll geek out about that stuff,
especially since they started rockabilly. They were a rockabilly band in Germany.
Yeah. And I still love those Hamburg records that the Star
Pete
Club
Best
records. We used to listen to that all the time. And that was, for me, since I only heard some of that stuff as a kid, as like being 14 or whatever, and getting the Star Club record, then that introduced me to the stuff I didn't know about. So then I started collecting all that other stuff. And it took years before I actually played it, but it was definitely an influence, that kind of playing. So like we talk about like East Bay Ray, but like George Harrison as well. So
and the Meteors. I hear the Meteors
yeah.
very heavy in what you do. And as I'd said again, Angelo Badalamenti, just whether you're cognizant of it or not, it figures very heavily in, because to me it seems like you were watching Twin Peaks when I was watching Twin Peaks.
Well, that would be true.
Yeah, I figured that part. I mean, come on.
Yeah. That would be true. All of that stuff. I mean, I've been a Lynch fan for a while, and definitely that vibe with Twin Peaks was, I mean, that definitely, like, so for me, like, as much as like we've been talking about all the rock stuff, but like I remember songs like Bullwinkle that was in the Pulp Fiction and the heroin scene, right?
Yep.
Like low key moody stuff like that. That was sort of like that sort of stuff was like my theme. That was my jam. And what's funny is all the groups I work with, it's like I'll write stuff and they're always like, okay, we got to pick the tempo up a little bit, because it's like I'll always go there with that darker, reverbed out, moody stuff. And even in the stuff I've been doing recently, you know, it still comes through, right? And also with the people I work with, like they sort of get brought into it as well, right? So even if I have different people playing stuff, like what I'm trying to do is expand the boundaries of that, instead of me playing everything, have other people also play it, but it still ends up being in that whole stew, I guess, of that. So yeah, I appreciate that. I guess the influence, like where I'm coming from, must be pretty apparent when I work with people to share these songs, right? Because you're like, that's one of the first things you mentioned.
but I have an ear for music. I'm a musician as well. I remember the obvious. I remember all of that stuff, and to me, like the progression makes sense.
Okay.
I always had an ear toward Ohio. Okay. Ohio, like I'm from Pennsylvania, the Scranton area. You're not that far away. So
no, I have friends from Scranton. Yeah, that are in Ohio now. They're from Scranton. My friend Sharon from Rululu is from Scranton, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, she is.
So I'm familiar with Scranton, not just because of The Office, right? But it's
Giant Sand is from here.
Yeah. Oh, Giant Sand. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And but yeah, they're like, I mean, and that band, The Obvious, was definitely a Ramones based, Beatles based, Ramones based, and then Replacements based group.
Yep.
But there was also kind of school for me as far as like being in a band and how to do that stuff and how I approached it. And sometimes I think I'm not that far off from that right now. It's just not 3 chords, it's 4. But
there's more mood now. There's more mood. There's more flourish.
Yeah. There's not, I mean, and The Obvious and John, it's funny because John Dubuck we wrote a lot of that stuff together, but he's really evolved into being like this John Prine influenced songwriter, and he just writes amazing stuff, that's really, really great. He has a band called John Dubuck's Guilty Pleasures, which I think is, like a great band name in the tradition of like the Nick Lowe and what was the Nick Lowe and his Impossible was it Impossible Bird? Was it Possible Cowboy, or was it Nick Lowe in his cowboy outfit too that he had?
There was Nick Lowe in his cowboy outfit. Okay. But there's another band too, which I'm
trashing his name. I'm trashing the band names now. Sorry, so because I think we're all moving towards greater states of Nick Lowe. But and we just saw him actually with Low Straitjackets backing the ultimate backing band for Nick Lowe's music. And when I saw them, I was like, that. Because then they do a mini set of the surf stuff too. And it's like, that to me is like perfect with a lot of the stuff we're talking about, because there's the punk edge, the surf edge, the traditional, some indie. There's like so much stuff going on there with these like amazing songs that he wrote.
He does stuff that sounds like the Sonics.
Yeah.
And kind of like moves into the Dick Dale of it all, and really like kind of like hones it all to a very fine edge, which is, it's refreshing because it doesn't kiss its own ass.
Yeah. It stays fresh, and it keeps finding new ways, and so it keeps moving forward. And I find that to be just incredibly inspiring.
Yeah.
Like as a player, as a guitar player, but also like I feel like I've been writing songs and playing in bands forever, as as we've now made evidence by certain references. But I've only really been like trying to like seriously write songs, I suppose, for several years now. And that record I just did was for the first major output of that, and then I just keep going from there. But it's like, so it's great to hear things like that, and that's still like kind of inspire and excite. I mean, it kind of makes you. I mean, it's tough when you're working on stuff, right? It's tough when you're playing and you're trying to keep going. Like, I mean, we need that inspiration, but sometimes we don't just need it in like that's a cool style or a cool song, but just the fact that someone's doing it. Yeah. Like to go out, we have a great record store here called Blind Rage now. It's like a punk store that specializes in vinyl, and they built a stage, right? And they had the Toxic Reasons play, and and they've also got a couple bands of people who are 19 and 20 years old, and that's about the only place in Dayton you can play if you're that age right now. So it's like, that's inspiring to see, right? It's just that sort of, and that's the whole DIY thing. And, obviously, I've had lots of experience in that space, right? It's in those bands where you know, a lot of that's been inspiring since the early punk days all the way through the Discord years that you were talking about. You know, it's like that. And now really a lot of the people I work with or you know, interact with now, it's like that same spirit. And I find that to be the thing that's really, because the thing is like for some songs I might write, like sometimes it's like you sometimes you might feel like you've been down the road before, right? Or I've done a couple of surf music with the Mulchmen, and it's like, okay, should I still do that, you know? But then you kind of hear people, whether they're doing that style or a different style, that just sort of like, it's a spark of life, right? And it's like a very positive thing, and it's just like, yes. And also I would say, just, you know, like in 2022, you can pretty much do anything now, right?
Yeah, because like,
I mean,
you're doing the Mulchmen, you do the Nicky K stuff.
Yeah,
that, you know, that it's its own being. Be it the orchestra, or, you know, like, and you're playing with people from Sunvolt and
like, yeah, it's well, and the thing is,
Wakefield from Long. Like, there's so much going on. You have so many irons in the fire. You know, musically, that the playing field's vastly open for you right now because there is so much to call from.
Yeah, it's true. And it's like, I mean, and in Dayton, of course, we've got a really rich music community that like has always reached out to other music communities. And and that is a big advantage. And that's been like Mark Patterson from Sunvolt is the guy when I was in high school who taught me how to put a record out and how to tour, right? And then he moved to Austin for 20 years, right? And to be play with Billy Joe Shaver and Robert Earl Keen and people like that. And he happened to come back to Dayton to take care of some family stuff. And he was between gigs. He hadn't picked up the Sunvolt thing, hadn't started yet. It was sort of like, you know, like maybe. Yeah. And so we just started working on these songs I had been writing for a year or so. And he was taking all of his experience and applying them to, you know, like helping me arrange the songs, right? And then by the time we were like into the recording process is when he picked up Sunvolt, and they've been rocking ever since. You know, I've gone to see them with him, and he's a world-class drummer, you know, and you know, and now, you know, I've been real fortunate to get to start playing with my friend Jim McPherson, who's been playing with the Breeders for a few years. So Jim's been working on, you know, newer material, which is the next stuff, the after the distance, right? The stuff now. And so we've been working on stuff together as well. So I've been really lucky to play with, I mean, just I get to play with these amazing people just like all my life, right? It's a little different now, kind of like having like raised kids, and, you know, like I'm in a different position. Like I don't go on tour, you know, like trying to work, like for me, like playing a Weekenders or like is pretty exciding, but not on the road, right? So it's kind of a different thing, but it's also given me the freedom to sort of like say, well, who would I like to work with? Who could I work with? You know, and find that people are really into it, especially if you can kind of put the thing together. Like, I mean, everybody in the Dayton and Columbus and Cincinnati, I mean, and beyond, really. Again, I think Dayton kind of has like exudes that vibe, right, of collaboration and support, right? And then I just find I just keep meeting people like that, right? That, you know, and then we end up doing work together because it's fun, you know. So and then they go off and do other stuff. So I've played with a lot of people who've gone on to do other really cool things, you know, and that's cool too, you know. So
it's just amazing too that it's almost incestuous, just like my area, where like people who are in Guided by Voices, people who are in Brainiac, this, that, or the other, they all kind of still throw their hats into the ring as far as the Dayton music scene. I mean, you look at like Craig from El No, like he's like, all of those guys like played with big bands, did big things, and they're still anchored to that area and that, not musical form, because you know, there's not a specific form or sound, Dayton sound, that doesn't exist. There's no Akron sound. It's just a very fertile melting pot of great musicianship and
supportive musicianship as the other thing. Where you can have you know, like it doesn't mean that like a country artist is playing with a hardcore band, but we a lot of bills are really mixed up, but there's room for everybody. And people are, I mean, we have a lot of great support, songwriters and a lot of great players, and just a lot of good team players as well. So you need a rhythm section. I mean, I got guys are here to do it, you know. And even though people go off and do other stuff, they're still back in that orbit. And I've that's a really cool thing, you know. So it's like, I mean, like I said, I mentioned Mark back when I was like 15, but it's like when I was 15, 16, it's like all those guys would show us how to do stuff, right? And so we're all sort of like that. Like if there's people who are trying to figure out like, oh, how do I get on Spotify playlists? I'm like, I'll show you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then people do the same thing for me. Even today, they're like, oh, let me show you how this works. Let me show you how the whatever. I don't even know. It's like all the different tools and stuff work. So it's a really cool community like that. And of course now, you know, like I'm, you know, the age, I'm sure someone will do the math. And there's people who are younger than me playing, and it's the same thing. I mean, it just keeps happening, and it's not defined by one certain sound. It sometimes it leans one way or the other. And you have folks like Todd Widener, who are like tremendous songwriters who have now gone out to California, who definitely influenced a lot of musicians here in town. But then they all just go their ways, or like Craig and Nate, you know, moved to places, but then they still kind of dial it back here. You know, like, I mean, they're not. I mean, I know that they've done like like reunion gigs and stuff before, but at the same time, they're moving forward with, you know, with Elno and working with people like Jamie and stuff like that. So that to me is, I mean, I don't know, it's really exciting in the same way that it was like to see like John form Enon and now work with Caribou and now have the Vertical Scratchers, and you know, and it's like all that stuff is just like, it's really cool to see all, you know, that those things happen and how people evolve and where they go, and you know,
and how they're doing it. How they're doing it now. The modern garage band is email.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
so,
here's my part. Here's my idea, the zygote of an idea.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you, flesh your part out, send it back to me.
Yeah.
Maybe we're not making noise in the garage together anymore, but we're still making noise. And
we're making noise in the garage band.
In garage band.
So I'll tell you, the record Mark and I made, Mark would come over here. So this is my practice space here. And we would work for we would like say, okay, 2.5 hours a song, bang out an arrangement, come back later, 2 hours for the song. We did that for every song on the record. That was sort of like our like focus time, you know. And then he would be going back and forth to his parents, or then he'd hit the road, or he'd come back. And we worked on that for a year or so, whatever. And then we went into the studio with everyone who came with us. And then we gave them our rough demo. Like I just make an iPhone demo or throw it on GarageBand pretty live. And maybe I'd sing a vocal on it or whatever, just to dial it in. And then we would give them, like, I'd play parts, but I wouldn't say play my parts. I'd say, here's the feel I'm going for. And then, you know, a Todd or Crazy Joe, Kate, a Patrick Himes, who runs Real Love Recording Studio, they would just make it their own. And then they would also bring new things to it, like cello and keyboards and things like that. So now over the pandemic, I started writing these next songs, figuring we're going to do the same way, but it never worked out because it never worked out, because you'd get COVID every time you try to go somewhere, right? So eventually we get to the point where we're going to have, like we did our demos, just like what you were saying. What we started doing is the demos were all in GarageBand with click tracks, and we'd have all the parts, and I'd send them around. I'm like, okay, we're going to learn these. And eventually we're like, well, maybe we'll just use this click track because we know the tempos are right. And rehearsed a couple times with Jim McPherson and Daisy Kaplan from Lung and Foxy Shazam. And then we're like, okay, so we're going to do this. Well, we're not, because COVID again. And so what we did is we're like, okay, the garage band is actually going to be the recordings. And Todd Widener and I started sending the recordings back and forth between California and Ohio in February. And it was basically like a guitar war. It was a duel. Like I'd have all my guitar parts, I'd send it to him, and he'd send back all these guitars that would go with it. And then I sent it to Tobin Sprout, and Guided by Voices, and Tobin would play all these weird keyboards and different like synths and stuff, and then he'd send it, and then I'd send it to Kate in Cincinnati, and she'd record all these, like I get like 7 cello parts would come back on it, and we suddenly had this big record. And finally we were able to go cut in at the end we cut the guitar, and this is like horrible to say this, right? We cut the drums and the bass together. Those guys were together with me, and we did them to the click track. And those guys are used to recording with click tracks, right?
Yeah.
And the demos and the click tracks were based on them in the first place. So they were very comfortable with it, and we knocked out the whole album in a day. And now we're doing vocals in the studio because expensive microphones, right?
Right.
But it's been this. It was like so far away from the experience I thought I would make, and because I thought I would make a very live album next time. But it's been really fun and really rewarding because I'm also trying to develop as a vocalist.
Yeah.
So it's given me this huge opportunity to learn to kind of like craft the songs and learn how to sing them and do all this stuff at a cost that is affordable, right? Because it's just the time and energy, really, of doing it. So we're going to take all the tracks and then they go into the studio and they get mixed and treated and whatever. But and the next album maybe it'll be live in the studio, who knows? But it's like it was a really good way to work in a pandemic. And I know a number of bands that found similar ways to work that were just like, how do we get from here to there? And I think that a lot of the things of like the technology that was kind of like maybe off-putting before the pandemic isn't anymore, because it's like the next Mulchmen album maybe it'll use a click track because Jim's very comfortable with a click track, but I won't demo the whole thing, but I might do the click track so we kind of have it dialed in for efficiency or accuracy or whatever, and I never even recorded the click track before. So.
Well, no, I mean, most of us we're very attuned to the idea of the drummer kind of going first with the guitarist.
Right.
And,
yeah.
You know what I mean? And doing it that good old fashioned way, recording in analog, which most of my recording background has to do with reel to reel or cassette.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And a Fostex. I had a Fostex 8-track that I spent all of my Paperboy money on when I was 14 years old. All right, we're going to record on this Fostex 8-track, which now people would break their asses to get their hands on. But back then they were like, you could get one out of Musician's Friend for $150. And it was not a big deal.
Absolutely.
But that's kind of how we did things. Like the guitar player would play for the drummer. The drummer would lay down those initial tracks, and we followed in suit thereafter. It's not that way anymore. You don't need to do that. It's not even a thought.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like what we did when we laid that, we kind of learned the songs, and then I made demos based on like listening to what that was. That sort of gave me the information, and then I brought them back to Jim. I was like, okay, Jim, if I have this demo, let's play in your basement, and he would play along with the song with the headphones, and that would be the proof, right? So we sort of did this like intersecting thing, and that's why I really think that's probably cheating, I suppose, but that's why we were able to record this stuff at the end. Otherwise, I think we might have suffered from having it be very stilted, which all my 4-track demos were always very stilted,
Sure.
And I don't know, like I mean, because 4 tracks were so fun, and the happy accidents were so fun, and the craziness was so fun, but it's still like I remember hearing some of those Guided by Voices things, especially like the Vampire and Titus, Shocker and Gloomtown, which were pure 4-track at that point, and then not even realizing right before that it was almost boombox, and it was boombox, but it was but like how they would get those things. Like how they would create the ambiance, like, the sound that they were getting out of that 4-track and the ways they would do it, because we all knew the weird things that would come out, but I always remember just trying to get it right all the time on the 4-track. And then these guys were they were just creating this like whole world, sonic world. And I remember hearing that. I mean, I played shows with those guys in high school, right? And I used to get their records because they would leave them at Goldenrod or whatever, and people weren't aware of them because they just weren't playing anymore. And then this happened, right? And my wife she was working at the record store, and she's like, "Wait a minute, I think we have some boxes of these records in the back, Forever Since Breakfast or whatever." But I remember hearing that and just being in shock at like Vampire and Titus, which is a super dark, moody 4-track record. And then, of course, they played these songs, and they were like huge anthems when they played it live, which only added to that sort of thing. I think that's one of those moments as well.
Yeah.
Of like hearing that and hearing this dark arty record of anthems recorded down the hall, or what is that in the basement? What is that?
Yeah.
There's across the street, and then they played it live in a very just unassuming rock and roll way, just like they did when I was in high school, and I think that's the sort of thing. I mean, not to mention amazing songs, right? But it's like is what became also very like endearing to people, right? It's like you've got this guy's writing like amazing songs, and it's complete, pure, just rock and roll. There's no frills, Even when they started elaborating in the recordings, it still has that same. I mean, just like the two records they put last year, I was just like, it's amazing to hear that, So I don't know, like things like that, or like it's just funny because now we're having happy accidents in GarageBand. You know what I mean? But it's also rewarding to get like all those cello tracks and being like, oh my gosh, it sounds like I've got like this sounds amazing. I can't believe that we're doing it here. And that excitement feels similar to when you figured it out on the 4-track, how to bounce.
That's why I don't bemoan the new generation and the way they do things, because as much as it is vastly dissimilar in form, it's still the same damn thing, really.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we had to kind of blindly find our way around bouncing tracks and, like figuring out how to, make a cassette recording, which is analog and does sound inherently good no matter what you do to it, because most happy accidents are still warm and massive.
They don't go.
No, they don't at all. There's that depth of field.
Yeah,
that's very upfront and apparent with an analog recording. There's still room to play in this digital stratosphere.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think so too. And I think the thing that's nice about that is like I've only recently learned how to do so. I'm only now learning how to mic something,
Yeah.
And so we're all going a combination of straight to digital plus the miking and blending it. And then Patrick Himes is kind of guiding this a little bit, saying, okay, well, there's certain boundaries because you can hear it.
Yeah.
Like at some point you'll hear it, and so Todd, like, all of Kate's stuff is just mic'd up cello, whereas Todd's stuff might be all in the latest and greatest Helix electronics or whatever, and I don't know what Tobin's doing, but it's so, and then and then I had a couple people record some kind of more like ambient sort of sounds too. And it's, it's just a cool, it's a cool blend of stuff. Right. So
yeah,
I'm really enjoying that. This might be the only time I make a record like that, but it's been a cool discovery, and it was a silver lining in the pandemic, I guess, is to do that. And we did another record as well that isn't out yet, but it's all acoustic guitar and cello, sort of this like ambient-ish, folkish, kind of darker sounding stuff. So played with this is a guitar here that my friend Patrick Seisenberger in Dayton builds these acoustic guitars that have sound holes.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. I've been admiring that the entire time. With those F holes were just like drawing my eye, I can't imagine how rich the sound is that comes out of an instrument like that.
Well, what's really cool is that, like, if you can I'm not sure if it translates, but
it does.
And then when you hear it here, you've got that sound just like punching right out at you. It's like having a monitor. So, but he built it knowing that I play both rockabilly, and then I also do, like not super finger picking stuff, but stuff that's a little more delicate. But he's built, I don't know how many, like maybe 24 guitars, and they all have different designs on them, but they're all incredibly well made.
And, it looks like you could even play like flat top style. Something like that.
Yeah.
In like John Prine the shit out of something like that.
Yes. Yeah. And that's actually kind of how we got together in the first place, because he was playing like some James Taylor kind of finger picking stuff, and I would play it and I'd be like boom chick boom chick boom chick boom chick, And so we've been working together for a few years, just trying to kind of just trying to give them some help, with trying to get the word out so anyway, so yeah, Patrick Seisenberger has been building guitars here for like many years, and does just a really amazing job. So I actually learned how to record digitally and very mid-fi over the pandemic. Got it was like we did a soundtrack for a University of Dayton animated short. And so I just kept working on stuff. And that was sort of like the way to, once I learned that, I was like, oh, I want to do this some more. So now I don't know, maybe the future is a combination of like the way we did 4-track demos, but you can take them forward a little bit more, like I find that kind of thing like we even did that back in the days of like Cage. Back we had our practice space. There's a couple songs on that album where we actually recorded like a backing track in the basement, and we just took it to the studio and used it as a bed, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I thought I was going to do with this, and then it ended up actually being more parts. Why not? It's 2022. We can do whatever we want.
Sure. And
as long as it sounds good, is the way as it turns out. And if it doesn't, I guess we'll do something else.
That Cage stuff was very early 90s, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
And, you kind of explored a lot of different musical frontier. Because like you take Cage and then you move in similar circles, but still very vastly different sonically. It's kind of like I have it all written down. I remember the obvious. I remember Cage, but there's, like what Dementia Precox.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, they were,
and that was like post-industrial synth driven, like very like ambient style, and you can't really pigeonhole anything you'd done precursor to this, because you did kind of explore a vast amount of different genre on your way to where you are now, which is very similar to my journey, because I used to do a lot of like industrial noise or just like Mare's Bow type stuff, to grindcore, to like cyber industrial death metal. But at the end of the day, I was really looking forward to being more like a Bob Dylan.
We all it was all in there somewhere. We're like, eventually I'm going to write these songs though. Well, and for me, like this whole, like all of these different styles have been like opportunities and wanting to learn and grow and try things. Cause I would hear something, I'd be like, I want to try to figure that out. And it's like, and then I would end up writing, and I'd end up working with people either to help me or to, to teach me or to just work on it with me, or they were just as interested or whatever. And it's just been this path that's been all like this. But now that I've finally gotten to this record, or that record that I made, and then the single, which is this even weirder permutation of this record, it's this continual exploration that I don't think is over either, because I've got stuff I'm working on now. I think that if I were to say something's like sort of the wide lane, the superhighway lane, I think I found this space, and there's so much I want to explore in this, because it brings so many things I've done in. But I still find myself naturally wandering over to the exit and trying different things too. So I've told myself I'm going to keep working on this, because this was a lot of work. It was like a lot more discipline than I had given myself before. And that was something I need, like, because I also like would manage a band and book a band, do that stuff. I would sometimes not give myself like enough time to really, I'm like, what if I really didn't have a band, didn't do anything? I just wrote the songs. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to write the songs. Now what? Oh, I'm not sure if I can play these. I don't think I can sing these. Oh, now what do I do? And then you just next step. So that's been really great way for me to sort of get myself to a point where, I think you were mentioning earlier, it's like now I feel like I can have it all and be comfortable. Whereas earlier I used to feel like, okay, I need to go over here. Oh, now I want to go over here, but these things aren't together. And now after this many years, I can actually take some elements from those different things, and I can start putting them into a set.
Yeah.
Not as easily as Bob Pollard could, with his solo material and experimental material and guided by voices. But I can pick a song here, pick a song there, and that makes me feel like cool. I kind of found a happy space to keep growing in, but also I can still bring in other elements, because I'll never lose that reverbed out guitar or that tendency to sort of meander a little bit. And I also don't think I'm going to give up writing, like, sad, somber songs, because I've just, since I was a kid and hearing that early country music, loved it and always gravitated, like, well, in our upbringing, I mean, there's plenty of sad songwriters and stuff. I mean, that's like, like all of that stuff. I've just always really enjoyed it. What's interesting is to write some of that stuff and then have people come back and tell me what they think of it. And like, so I would think it's one thing, and people would come back and they're like, oh, this song, it reminded me of this and that and this and their experience. I'm like, and so my sort of definition of the songs grow a little bit. So for that reason as well, it's kind of given me this idea like, oh, I really enjoyed this experience of just bearing down and really writing and then seeing what happens. Yeah. And then after I finish that record, I'm like, can I keep doing it? And the answer is apparently yes. Because I got another record now, which is a year away, but it's like, but that is a great, exciting feeling to have that and to still have music ideas, right? To keep doing
it.
And this record,
you're coming at it from a very Townes Van Zandt style of, like it's thought to hand. It's just, direct. Of course, you're accumulating a group of individuals to help you realize this idea, but still in all, it is songwriter based.
It's just and it's
endeavor.
And it's interesting because like when I worked with Todd Widener is like tremendous songwriter, and great singer, amazing guitar player. So he's been involved in these two records as like I've written the songs, and then he's kind of brought in his perspective on it into playing it. So Kate Wakefield is a tremendous songwriter, my favorite singer in the world, and like an incredible cellist.
Lung is incredible,
and Lung is my favorite band in the world. Future of rock and roll is Lung, but so she's brought in like her perspective on those songs as well. So it hasn't so it's interesting because I haven't co-written with them. I've written the songs, but they've been able to take them and I think take them to the next level. And it was really interesting in both albums, the one we're working on and the one we did, The Distance, is to have Todd play what he hears in my song and then have Kate play what she hears in my song and also respond to Todd. Or in this new album, it's Todd and me playing together in almost like a television kind of way. And then what happens when you add the cello in there, and then Patrick has been playing keyboards and bass. Daisy's playing bass, on this record. And so it was interesting to bring Jim McPherson in, and then Jim did the same thing and started interpreting those songs,
Yeah.
So that's been it's been a really cool way to partner with people. And now I have a band now, but the band is not the same people because everyone I'm talking about is touring and have their big bands. But so I work with another songwriter, singer, and great guitar player, Kylene Downs, from this area. And Kylene has been playing, she was playing bass with the group in the trio format, and then she plays lead guitar. So a lot of the lead stuff you hear on that album, she plays that stuff. And so it's another person who is sort of bringing a perspective on the music as well. And I find that's like a really healthy way to keep sort of the music moving forward, especially as I go from saying, like The Distance, I play those songs live and I sing them, and now this next album I sing. So it's like we're sort of like, trying to figure out how to bridge the gap and where we go from here. And it's like I'm having so much fun.
But you're not being precious about it, which I find refreshing, because you're allowing for there to be a reciprocity in the actual writing of the music or the presentation of the music. You're not just being like, nope, mine. You do what I say. It doesn't seem to be going down like that. There is that idea of a band environment, of an open environment.
Yeah, because it's like I grew up in bands that were like democratic, but that's harder when you're in your late 40s, early 50s, because I had a lot of trouble having a band. Even my own band, I had a lot of trouble running it because of all of the responsibilities I have. So to kind of work in this way, like I really love like playing something, laying something out, and then seeing how Todd interprets it. In fact, we did one song where I thought it was not going to make it, you know, and then my Santa Todd, and he came up with things I never imagined happening that basically kept that song going. We had another song I sent to Kate, as, again, no instructions, and it came back, and I ended up saying, oh, we're going to, it's like, because of what she recorded, we're going to like take off this whole front end. Like, it rebuilt the song around the parts she had done. And to me, like, that is, I love that. That's a 2022 equivalent of when we were all in the basement and we're working on stuff. And it's like, hey, what did you just play? And I love that. And I love the fact that I feel it also keeps me really on my toes with how I play. Like this, like, I feel like I learned how to write better songs, you know. And before this, I played in a group with Paige Beller, who's like this amazing songwriter, and she writes these incredibly, like, you know, dark and sad, powerful songs. And working with her, it was I was playing very part-time for a while, and I played with her, and I just had the joy of playing again, was back, of being in a band. And then I thought, these songs are so powerful. They actually were really inspiring me to get off my butt and work, you know. And then, you know, after that, then she comes out with an album that just blows anything I could do. But it's like, she's a very inspiring songwriter to me as well. So to kind of have those different parts is it's really exciting. I think it just keeps things moving, and it has changed how I've written songs. It's also changed, this whole experience has changed how I play guitar. Like, I don't play the same way, even though it is the same. I mean, you hear it, right? But it's changed how I approach it and think about it. And it's like, to me, this is the best ever. You know, and now I've been playing with Kylene, and she's really changing how I'm playing too, you know, like just being involved in these songs together and working together on stuff. So, that's like, I mean, I don't know, to me, it's kind of, it makes me think that's kind of what it was all about in the first place. Like, like I can go back to being, I don't know how old you are. I was 14 when I started playing in bands.
I was about 13 myself.
That constant excitement of, like, you didn't even know what you were doing at that point, but whenever it started to click, it was just really exciting. How great to have that. And working on stuff, but being better.
Well, especially like taking into consideration when I'd first started playing in bands, it was the second wave of hardcore. You know, it was the late 80s. The early 80s was the real, you know, renaissance of hardcore punk, the first birth of it with Minor Threat and, you know, like SSD, all of those.
Right. All the SST stuff. Yeah.
I came in on the Revelation Records era, you know, 87, 88.
Okay.
And like, it was that second era, but it was still vital, and it was still dangerous and secretive. And we would play like this arcade in the downtown area of the town I grew up in. And, you know, you were just so excited to be there and be a part of something that whenever anyone came to practice with a new idea, you celebrated this new idea. Like, yes, this is what we were missing. And then yes, please, like, bring it. That was my idea of what being in a band was. And I think I have a leg up on a lot of these newer, younger people, because they're kind of coming to it from not a selfish perspective, but an insular perspective, where, you know, this is my baby. I've been playing this at home and working on this at home, and you're not playing what's in my head. So maybe, you know, the idea of you having as much of a say as I do doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, I could be completely off the mark, because I'm not in my 20s and 30s. So I don't know how these folks think. I can tell you from a guy in his late 40s that my experience in a band was taking all comers and trying to integrate it. Democratically.
It's interesting, because I think as we learn things and go along, we start figuring out how we do things. And then pretty soon maybe we start putting up some borders, or setting some expectations, and maybe some of that's okay. I think it's kind of tough when you start that way. And I do know a few folks in this area where they've been working on stuff on their own, and they haven't gotten out to play with people. And and so my hope is that they sort of maybe get over that hurdle. If they don't have that feeling, if they have that concern that you express, right? That they learn through that experience. For us, I guess maybe we just didn't know better. But like for my guitar students, they range from 12 to 14. I teach guitar fundamentals. And so like I want you to learn how to learn a song, how to write a song if you want, how to enjoy it, and then also sort of set the stage so that if you want to work with others, you're sort of ready to collaborate. And then my friend Kylene Downs actually runs one of those like rock camps for teenagers in Dayton, and there are all these kids who what you were saying, but they don't have people, so she brings them together. And and the first thing they do is they learn some cover songs, but they also learn how to be on stage together, how to do the whole show, and then they put on a show. And then some of them go off and they become their own bands in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that's a really like healthy way to kind of help people along. Like I didn't have that issue when I was younger, and I was in a real community of bands that had those issues too. But I have run into that, and over time, as you sort of become more on your own, like I guess so one of the things, like I started recording a lot of stuff on my own, and maybe I was developing that mentality. And then when I listened to it, I was like, it sounds flat. Like, why does it sound flat? Because it's missing these things. So what have I learned? I've learned I'm really pretty good at communicating my ideas, but what happens if I actually turn them over? And that was, I will say, for a minute, like that was a little scary to do, because I had started drifting back, but then I was really rewarded by the fact that like I took some big chances, and then it just really paid off. And now I think it's a way of working. It's sort of like the 53-year-old version of being the 13-year-old, right? It's just that like, in order for, and I will say part of this also is I'd like to think it's a good experience for everybody that does it as well, because everyone's got their, like a lot of the people I play with, they have their other things, right? So how can I hopefully create something for them that they find is worthwhile, right? So is the music good? Do they enjoy being involved in it? Is it a nice experience when they do it? And then I really try to work really hard to promote it, and get that music out there in different ways. And I mean, we see what happens, we're seeing right now, I'm working on this single that's coming out.
That's the end of part 1. That single we ended on is the song at the top of the show, Way to Me, which is now available streaming everywhere: Bandcamp, Spotify, Apple Music, and most importantly, on a lathe cut, clear, 7-inch piece of vinyl. Nick is going to be playing tomorrow night, and if you're in the Dayton, Ohio area, I strongly suggest you get out there, show your support. So I'm going to leave you on a different note, because we're picking this right back up in a couple days. He's still going to be Nick. I'm still going to be Peter. You're still going to be beautiful. From 3:33 a.m. studios, this has been the Book of Very, Very Bad Things podcast. Good night.
So there's no need to be alarmed. I followed my baby into the lion's den, but I went down real slow. Nothing to cling to, nothing to linger on. broken soul where no one else would know. The moon was large and high and bright. You howled at it all night, but the moon was just the moon, I guess. So there's no way to